Afghanistan, Shindand Air Base. The morning of June 16, 1983, a Soviet Su-17 fighter bomber taxis onto the runway. In the cockpit sits Senior Lieutenant Valery Kulyakov. To the ground crew, it's just another routine training sortie in the daily grind of the Soviet-Afghan war. But one chilling detail is about to blow the entire operation wide open. In the control tower, a dispatcher freezes. His instruments show Kulyakov's fuel tanks are topped off to the brim. For a short-range training flight, this isn't just an anomaly, it's a massive breach of protocol. Why does a pilot need that much fuel if he isn't planning on going far? Kulyakov senses the sudden hitch in the radio chatter. He can almost hear the squadron commander's voice beginning to form a lethal question in his headset. He doesn't wait. With a sharp flick of a switch, he severs all communication with the base forever. The roar of the afterburner drowns out the doubts of the men on the ground. The nose tips toward the sky, and the multi-ton machine tears away from the concrete. The Pakistani border is 75 miles away. Just 12 minutes of flight time separate him from being a hero of the state or a traitor to the empire. Would you risk everything, knowing there is no turning back? Kulyakov levels out at 13,000 feet, heading dead south. Inside the cockpit, the silence is deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine and his own heavy breathing into the oxygen mask. He knows that back at Shindand, communications officers are frantically trying to ping his signal, and interceptor wings are already scrambling with orders to shoot to kill. Seconds stretch into hours. To his right, the snow-capped peaks of the Hindu Kush drift by, a natural fortress guarding a different world. Kulyakov constantly scans his radar and mirrors. Every speck on the horizon could be an air-to-air missile fired by his own comrades. In this moment, he isn't thinking about geopolitics or his oath of allegiance. Only one number pulses in his brain: 12 minutes. That is exactly how long a Su-17 needs on full afterburner to cross the invisible line on the map. 12 minutes between a past defined by a wife's betrayal and the endless dust of Afghanistan, and a future that is as terrifying as it is unknown. As the distance gauge hits the critical mark, Kulyakov slams the stick forward, diving into the jagged canyons to vanish from Soviet radar. He crosses into Pakistani airspace. The plan he spent 3 months perfecting has worked, but he has no idea that the real hunt for him has only just begun. What could drive an elite Soviet pilot, a veteran of the Afghan meat grinder, to such a desperate act? The answer wasn't found in a secret dossier, but in a simple mail envelope. Weeks before his defection, Kulyakov received a letter from his wife. It was short and merciless. "Valera, I can't do this anymore. I've filed for divorce." 7 years of marriage and 3 years of war ended with a single sentence. For 28-year-old Lieutenant Valery Kulyakov, the world collapsed in an instant. The Soviet-Afghan war was already grinding down his nerves and taking his friends, and now the only reason to return home had been ripped away. 2 sleepless nights transformed his heartbreak into cold, lethal calculation. Kulyakov realized nothing held him to the motherland anymore. Only endless dust and a bleak future lay ahead. He decided to burn his bridges so thoroughly they could never be rebuilt. As his Su-17 crossed the border, Kulyakov set a course for the nearest major Pakistani airbase, Samungli. He knew that to the local air defense, he was an unidentified Soviet aggressor who could be swatted from the sky without warning. At the airfield, sirens wailed, interceptors scrambled into the air, and anti-aircraft crews on the ground froze with their fingers on the triggers, awaiting the command to fire. Kulyakov masterfully brought the heavy machine down, his tires screaming against the concrete. The moment the engine died, Pakistani special forces swarmed the jet. Dozens of rifles were leveled at the cockpit canopy. The pilot slowly raised his hands and slid back the glass. His first words as he dropped to the tarmac were, "I need political asylum." He didn't know yet that his plane was more than just a ride. It was $1 million golden ticket to a new life. For the CIA, Kulyakov's landing was a Christmas present in the middle of summer. At the time, Western intelligence was desperate for live samples of Soviet hardware from the Afghan theater. The Su-17 wasn't just a jet. It was a flying treasure trove of classified data. American engineers rushing to Samungli were in a state of professional ecstasy. Inside the cockpit waited the latest Soviet avionics, encrypted communication systems, and most importantly, the secret aim and navigation complex. This tech was what allowed Soviet pilots to conduct precision strikes in the treacherous high-altitude terrain of the Hindu Kush. By stripping the plane down to its last bolt, the U.S. gained the blueprint to counter Soviet air power and jam their radars. Kulyakov hadn't just sold his honor, he had sold the technological edge of an entire army, and Langley knew exactly what it was worth. But while technicians picked apart the Su-17, Kulyakov himself was moved to a high-security interrogation center in the city of Quetta. His first days of freedom looked nothing like a Hollywood movie. Instead of champagne, he found a Spartan cell. Instead of accolades, he faced endless cross-examinations. The Americans and Pakistanis worked in tandem, driven by one primary fear, that Kulyakov was a Trojan horse sent by the KGB to feed the U.S. disinformation. He was strapped to polygraphs and forced to reconstruct the last few months of his life minute by minute, with handlers searching for the slightest inconsistency. Kulyakov existed in a psychological vacuum. He was already a traitor to his own people, but he wasn't yet one of them to his former enemies. In those cold rooms, he realized a terrifying truth. In the world of intelligence, a defector is not a human being. They are a perishable commodity, valuable only as long as information can be squeezed out of them. While Kulyakov was adjusting to a foreign sky, the gears of the Soviet state machine were grinding at maximum velocity. The news of the stolen Su-17 reached the very top of the Kremlin. The reaction was swift and merciless. A secret military tribunal delivered its verdict in absentia: treason. Kulyakov was stripped of every rank and medal, but the core of the sentence was a death penalty by firing squad. In the Soviet Union, such sentences had no expiration date. To the system, he was no longer a man. He was a target to be neutralized. Deep within the halls of Lubyanka, a black op codenamed Project Traitor was initiated. The KGB's elite analysts began meticulously piecing together the pilot's habits, weaknesses, and connections. They knew the golden rule of the hunt. Sooner or later, everyone lets their guard down. After months of grueling polygraphs and background checks, the CIA finally cleared Kulyakov. He was handed a new identity: John Cooper, a modest sum of cash, and a new life in sunny Florida. On the surface, it was the ultimate American dream: palm trees, the Atlantic Ocean, and total freedom. But life under a false name proved to be a gilded cage. John Cooper was forbidden from contacting his past. His every move was monitored by handlers, and every Russian-speaking stranger triggered a spike of pure paranoia. Working low-wage jobs to stay under the radar, he slowly realized that the freedom he had traded everything for didn't smell like the ocean breeze. It smelled like cheap fast food and agonizing loneliness. He was free from the USSR, but he had become a slave to his own shadow. The theft of the Su-17 with its classified avionics was a strategic disaster for Moscow. The KGB generals knew that Kulyakov, in American hands, was an open book of Soviet military secrets. The order was absolute: the traitor must be silenced forever. The operation shifted into high gear in October 1983. Intelligence officers methodically probed for cracks in the pilot's new life. His greatest vulnerability? Nostalgia. Despite his new name, Kulyakov couldn't sever his soul from his homeland. He frequented Russian delis and sought out fellow expats, desperate for the taste of black bread and the sound of his native tongue. The KGB needed an operative who could get close, someone who could become his brother. Enter Gennady Varenikov, a GRU major and veteran deep-cover illegal who had lived in the U.S. for years under the persona of a businessman named George Miller. His mission was surgical: don't strike immediately, build total trust. Their first chance meeting took place at a Russian grocery store. Varenikov gave a masterclass performance as a fellow displaced soul struggling to adapt to the West. An unlikely friendship was born. They spent evenings in bars, drinking whiskey and reminiscing about the motherland. Kulyakov, exhausted by isolation, finally found the one person who truly understood him. He had no idea that every fear he confessed, every habit he revealed, and every Afghan war story he told was being instantly relayed back to Moscow. Varenikov became his guardian angel, the very man who was already measuring him for a coffin. American counterintelligence wasn't blind. Kulyakov's handler, a veteran CIA operative named Johnson, sensed the shadows closing in. He watched as John Cooper transformed from a twitching paranoiac into a relaxed man who had finally found a close friend. Johnson began a game of his own. He placed Varenikov under silent surveillance, scrubbing his background through every available database. But the Soviet illegal was flawless. His cover as a Canadian businessman held up under every lens. It was a duel of titans. While the CIA searched for cracks in paperwork, the KGB struck at the heart. Johnson warned Kulyakov, Don't trust anyone who speaks your language. But in the end, bone-deep loneliness proved stronger than professional protocols. The climax arrived on a quiet Saturday morning. Varenikov invited Kulyakov on a fishing trip to a secluded spot, far from prying eyes. Just you, me, and the silence, like when we were kids on the Volga, he promised. Starving for genuine human connection, Kulyakov agreed without hesitation. He didn't even leave a note for his handler. They sat on the shore of a derelict lake. Varenikov poured tea from a thermos. At that moment, the masks were discarded. "Valera, you know the penalty for stealing a Su-17 is a firing squad, don't you?" the friend asked quietly. In his eyes, Kulyakov saw not sympathy, but the cold glare of a military tribunal. A specialized KGB toxin, designed to leave no trace, was already dissolving in the tea. Kulyakov understood everything, but it was too late. His body turned to lead, and the shoreline began to drift into a thick, gray fog. On that bank, time stopped. The poison acted slowly, paralyzing the will while leaving the mind agonizingly clear. Varenikov was in no hurry to finish the job. He sat down and spoke, calmly, almost paternally. This wasn't just an assassination, it was a psychological execution. "You thought you bought freedom, Valera?" the agent whispered. "You sold a plane built by thousands of people, and the brothers you shared bread with in Shindan." Varenikov laid out fresh photos from the Soviet Union, Kulyakov's aging parents, his ex-wife, his friends. The KGB didn't want to make him a martyr. They wanted him to feel the crushing weight of his betrayal before the end. Kulyakov stared at the images, realizing he had become an outcast to everyone he ever loved. The realization hit harder than the poison. While the Secret Services finished their bloody game, the stolen Su-17 continued its service, but under a different flag. After a deep-dive study at Langley, the jet was moved to a testing range in Arizona. American test pilots flew dozens of sorties in it, simulating dogfights against Soviet hardware to master the enemy's tactics. Today, that very Su-17 stands in an American aviation museum. It looks majestic. The predatory profile, the sweeping wings, the Afghan-era camouflage. But if you look closely at the plaque, you'll notice a strange detail. It lists the technical specs, the speed, and the armament in meticulous detail. But there is not a single word about the man who brought it there. Valery Kulyakov's name has been erased from official history. To the Americans, he was a nameless delivery man of valuable cargo. To the Russians, a traitor whose name is never spoken aloud. Valery Kulyakov did not die at the lake that day. The CIA intervened in time and John Cooper was saved. For the third time, his name and location were changed. He was sent to Alaska, to the frozen city of Fairbanks, under lifelong protection. But did it save him? He spent his final years in total isolation, flinching at every rustle of wind and the distant roar of every passing plane. In 2003, the former senior lieutenant died alone in a hospital from lung cancer. There was no family at his funeral, no friends, only two silent FBI agents. He had escaped one prison, only to build another for himself, one with no exit. His grave bears a fake name and a fictional birth date. Kulyakov paid the ultimate price for his flight. He lost the right to his own memory. The question remains, were 10 years of life and eternal fear worth that single, desperate leap beyond the horizon?